Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar today. It's 4 o'clock, so we'll get started. My name is Liam Cunningham. I'm the volunteer coordinator with Layers of London. And today we have Jonathan Blaney, who's the head of digital projects at the Institute of Historical Research, who's going to walk us through some online resources that are based at the Institute and give some general tips on conducting history research online. So thank you very much, Jonathan. And just to explain a bit how it works, about how it works, your camera or microphone won't be needed at all in the session. Jonathan's going to do his presentation for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have time for a Q&A afterwards. And to communicate your questions to us, you can use the chat box, which you can access in the panel that's down at the bottom. And you just type them in there, but please save them till the end, and then I will relay them to Jonathan, and hopefully he'll know the answers. Okay, so I'll hand over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Liam. Thanks, everyone, for coming along, and thank you to the Layers team for inviting me. I should say to start with that there's lots of different types of historical material on British History Online, and I'm not an expert on any of them, so don't be too hopeful with your niche historical questions. I'm going to try and do something I haven't done before, which is to use the browser for my entire presentation. That's because in Zoom it's a bit tricky to swap between sharing your screen with different applications, so I don't want to go back and forth between a PowerPoint and the web because I think it would be a bit clumsy. So let's see how that goes. I'm going to share now. So hopefully you can now see my screen. British History Online, our strapline is a digital library of key sources for the history of the British Isles. If you haven't seen our homepage, it's here. One thing you should know immediately about British History Online is that normally some of our transcriptions are premium content. We charge a small amount for access to them, and that allows us to keep the site going. It's really crucial income. But because of the circumstances at the moment, since beginning of April, with our awareness, for example, that we students taking exams and people completing theses and dissertations, we've made all of our transcriptions free. And we're going to do that until the end of September. So if you want to look around now, this is the best time to do it. We've got really, I think, about 4 areas of strength in BHO. We have lots of guides to manuscripts known as calendars, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute. We have lots of local history stuff, and I'll show you some of that. And we've got quite a lot of parliamentary material. And at the end, I'm also going to show you one of our nice maps that we have. We have a small map section as well. Really chronologically, 1400 to 1800 is the sort of sweet spot with our content. We don't have tons for the early Middle Ages and before, and we don't have much modern material. That's partly because we mostly digitize out of copyright material. So modern things generally are not available to us. So let me go now to one of our, actually this is my outline of what we're going to go through today. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are some of our calendars. We have about 500 volumes of calendars on BHO, and this is just one part of one of them. This is the letters and papers of Henry VIII, and this is for the period, the first half of January of 1524. And what the editor did was to bring together summaries of all manuscripts that they could find relating to Henry VIII, and then organize them chronologically to make them easy to access. So note the date at the top, if you can read that, Her Majesty's Stationery Office 1875. So these are actually quite old sources, but they're still extremely valuable. And if we go down, I'll talk about in a minute about the images at the top of the text, but here, hopefully you can see this. The first item here is a letter from Anne Boleyn to her father. And this is slightly unusual in that the editor has chosen to transcribe the whole of the letter. They really do vary, these calendars, in how much detail they give about the particular document they're talking about. And that really reflects the biases and the preferences of the time they were calendared, because nowadays I think historians will be much more interested in ordinary people, what we might now call history from below, than perhaps people were in 1875 on the whole. So Anne Boleyn, of course, gets the full treatment here, and you can see her letter in French. And if you wanted to find this manuscript of Anne Boleyn's letter and look at it more closely, then in the left-hand column you have the origin of the manuscript, which in this case is Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, and you could go there and ask to see it. I'm going to scroll down a bit and show you that some of the summaries are much more basic, much more terse, because these are not as interesting to the editor as Anne Boleyn. It really was an editorial choice. And one of the unusual things about the letters and papers of Henry VIII is that the manuscripts come from all different archives. So we had Corpus Christi College, Cambridge. Then below that, at the top there, number 2, you can see that one's in the British Museum, what would now be the British Library, of course. And then the next one down is in the Record Office. That's now better known as the National Archives in Kew. And the idea is that you would you would find your reference and you would go now to the British Library, or you go to the TNA and ask for that document to see more details. One thing I'm just going to mention out of interest, because I think it's always a nice thing if you don't know it, some of these in the left are named after Roman emperors. Those are British Library manuscript call numbers, but their origin is from the Cotton Library in London, which burnt down. All of its manuscripts went to the British Library eventually, but the way that the Cotton Library was organised was that there were rows of library shelves, and at the end of each one was the bust of a Roman emperor. So that's how they catalogued, and so you'll see things like Caligula, Nero, Claudius, and so on. We have hundreds of thousands of manuscripts calendared on British History Online. Some of them are in archives around Europe, but the great majority of them are actually in, as I mentioned, the TNA, the National Archives. Many of our calendar series are just of that archive. So that's the main one you can go and find. Because these are calendars of state papers principally, and so they were kept by the state, quite rightly. One exception is Queen Elizabeth's advisor. Those are the Cecil papers. The Cecil family, which advised both Elizabeth and James I, actually kept all of their papers, which were really state papers, and they're actually now in Hatfield House. So our calendar of the Cecil papers is for a different set. I'm going to go back now to my table of contents, and I'm going to just quickly tell you a technical thing which I think is really important but people don't often think about. This is how we get the books onto British History Online. Most of the archives that you would use something called OCR, which stands for Optical Character Recognition. What it is a program, a computer program, which reads the text and tries to translate it into something meaningful in English or whatever language the text is in. We don't use that method. We use rekeying, which is literally someone sits and types out the entire text again as they see it. And then they send it to us because we pay companies to do this. And then we check how accurate it is. If it's not 99.95% accurate on our samples, then we send it back and they have to improve it. So this is an incredibly accurate way of doing things. As I say, most archives you would use don't use that method. It's very expensive and you can't really do it at scale. So something like Google Books, which is perhaps the best known of these, everything in Google Books is done with OCR, with optical character recognition. But you don't necessarily know that, because what you see when you use Google Books is actually a photograph of the page of the book, which they've cleaned up in all kinds of ways to make it look nice. And then they highlight your search on the page. But behind that, which you don't see normally, is a transcription by a computer program. And quite often, if you get to see those, and I've got an example for you later, they're actually much worse quality than you would really expect. So it means when you do a search in an archive that's done by OCR, you may not be getting maybe half of the results you would get with a fully accurate transcription. So that's important to know. So I want to go back to the Anne Boleyn images now. So our method is this is the original book published in 1875 with the letter from Anne Boleyn here. So what we would do is we would get the book in the IHR library, we would send it to a company in Leeds who make the images. They send us back the book and the files. Then we send these images like this one here to India, and then that's where it's the company there keys them for us and sends them back. So we specify how it's done, and then we do the quality checks afterwards. We have these page images for quite a few of our texts on British History Online, but not all of them. Partly that's because of things like copyright. For example, if there are photographs and things like that, we're not allowed to use. We can't just drop page images in of the books. And another reason is that some of our stuff is what we call born digital. That means it was in digital format when it came to us, and we simply convert it to British History Online. Another of our areas of strength is local history. I'm just going to jump straight into a deep level of the history of the county of Oxford, volume 18, and the parish of Warborough. And this really just shows you how detailed this Victoria County History series is. It's been going for 120 years. It was named in honour of Queen Victoria. That's why it's called the Victoria County History, at the very end of her reign and life. And we have about 200 volumes on British History Online of the VCH, and that's the great majority of, you can see we don't have copyright for all of the images. That's a great majority of what's been printed. But even though there are 200 plus volumes of the VCH, it's by no means the case that every county is covered. It's patchy. Lots of counties are not done at all. Some counties only have a couple of volumes. So if I just go up the top of the page and go back up, Oxfordshire is actually an extremely well done county, very densely covered, because we have 18 volumes, which is, it's not complete, but it's pretty good. And we have all 18 volumes on BHO. I'm going to just talk now about parliamentary history. We have a lot of volumes of what was actually the predecessor to Hansard. Hansard didn't really start until the mid-19th century, and even when it started, it wasn't actually, as it is today, a verbatim transcript of what happened. It was more like summaries, and gradually evolved in the late 19th century into full summaries. But we have lots of volumes of these, which are the calendars, the Journal of the House of Lords and the Journal of the House of Commons, the predecessors to Hansard. They're very interesting, but I thought I would show you instead something much earlier. This is, I hope you can see on the right hand of the top of the column, this is the Parliament held by Richard II in 1394. This is from our series, Parliamentary Records of Medieval England. And what you get here is that specialist scholars in the early parliaments have gone through, they've transcribed such documents as exist for those parliaments. Sometimes there's almost no record remaining. And they also give translations, as here, from the Latin and French that you can see in the left. And they give commentary, and they also summarise things that are known about that parliament. At the time, Parliament wasn't necessarily held in Westminster. It tended to follow the king around. So that's why it says at the top, held in Westminster, that many of them were held around the country. So this is a great source, and it's one of the things which is free at the moment on BHO, but normally it would be part of our premium content, which, by the way, is only £35 a year. So we think it's quite a good deal for individual subscribers. So I'm going to now go and show you something a bit more graphic. I'm going to go to one of our maps, my favourite map on BHO. We do have the complete or almost complete Ordnance Survey maps, what's called the First Epoch Ordnance Survey maps. These were done in the 19th century, and they took about 70 years to map the whole country fully. And we have almost complete sets of those. So, do go and look at those. But these, this Agas map from the late 16th century is more fun. And that's partly because this is actually a very high resolution scan. So this is London. You can pan right in and the page will resolve gradually. You can see that it's actually done to a nice level, and you can do things like drag and pan. So I wonder if I can find Yeah, so north, this is around Old Street, for example. This is all, of course, fields at that time. And if you go in, you can see, you know, they've put nice things in like little donkeys, and there's a windmill somewhere around here. There's some people. And if I go back, I think, is that St. Paul's there? No, that's St. Pancras. Lots of the street names are actually exactly as they are today, which is nice to see, even though part of this area was, of course, destroyed by the fire, because I'm in the city. And I'm going to go down to the Thames, and I want to show you this at the bottom, which is my favourite thing. And that someone's watering their donkeys in the Thames here. And that reminds us that in the 17th and 16th centuries, the Thames was much broader and much shallower than it is now when it was embanked, after being embanked in the 19th century. So people could actually, you know, go down to the water's edge and water their donkeys easily. There's much more on BHO than I've got time to show you today. I'm going to move on to a few other related projects, but do have a look around. And if you have any questions, ask me in the chat. We have about 1,300 volumes, which is not much compared to something like Google Books, but as I've explained, we think we have a much more accurate thing to offer people. You know, if you search British history online, you're very likely to be finding exactly what you expect and want to find. So it's a small but hopefully of good quality. I'm going to show you Connected Histories. This is a really amazing site. I worked on this a long time ago. It's been going for about 10 years. I'm really proud of it. It was a joint project between the Universities of Sheffield, the University of Hertfordshire, and us at the Institute of Historical Research, University of London. And what it is a one-stop shop for searching historical sources to do with British history. And as you can see, the date range here is 1500 to 1900. We put some of the BHO material on here. And when it was in date, in the right date, there's lots and lots of other stuff. And in fact, there are some enormous sources here. We've got about 25 resources, and you can look through them there. Anyone who's used, for example, the British Library newspapers knows what an absolutely huge data set that is. So if I'm going to do a search and show you the way we tried to organize the data, because this was a problem, because if you find there's one dominant data set, then you don't want all of your top 1,000 results to be from that one set. So search for something I know there's not many of, which is Milam. And you see what we did is we decided to break out all of the results per data set. So here you can see that Victoria County History, which I've also already mentioned, has 3 results, 7 from elsewhere on British History Online. And if you go down to British newspapers, there are more, there's 57. So you can see that's actually quite dominant in this set of results. It's over half of all the results. So I think it's quite a good decision we took at the time to split these out. But if you can, I hope you can read this. I'm going to make it a bit bigger. This is what I was talking about the nonsense you often get behind text captured by optical character recognition. To make this search work, the British newspapers had to give us the underlying transcriptions that they used. And so we could expose it, and then you can then go to the newspaper if you have an account and view the actual newspaper. But when you use British newspapers, you don't see that. You don't see what we've got here with all of this N1, WBF, PZZ, and so on, which is just bad OCR. You don't see that. You just see your result for Milam superimposed on the image of the newspaper. So this actually does quite a nice service in exposing the way things actually happen behind the scenes. To be fair to British newspapers, this was done a long time ago, I think 20 years ago. OCR technology has got better, but obviously no one's going to go back and re-image and re-OCR all of these British newspapers. So this is what we're stuck with, and it's good to know when you're using these resources what kind of technical methods were used to produce them. And actually at the top, if I go into British newspapers, what we decided to do was have a summary of these things I'm just talking about now, just to make it clear to everybody the differences between these different types of digital resources. And here we have technical methods, And as I was explaining, it tells you what I've just said. It was done by OCR, not as accurate as the rekeying of text. So that's just good to know with any resource you're using. So I'm going to go back to now to BIFMO, which is another IHR, Institute of Historical Research resource. This is to do with furniture makers. We have, I think we have about 70,000 furniture makers on BIFMO, British and Irish furniture makers online. I don't really know much about furniture makers, even though I've worked on this project for a couple of years. So I've gone for a really obvious one, Thomas Chippendale. This has quite a long biography because, of course, he's an extremely eminent furniture maker. On the left-hand side, what we've tried to do is extract facets or taxonomy terms relating to this entry for Chippendale. So you can see, I hope, occupation, joiner and cabinet maker, materials that he worked with. These are taken from the text, not from anyone, kind of in a scholarly way, thinking about the career of Chippendale. Objects mentioned, ornamentation and style. So if I just click on Ormolu here, it should find me all of the furniture makers that we know worked with Ormolu, which to people really interested in furniture history, this is really useful information. And it comes up with about 23. I'm going to click on one here, which is GM Dutton, and show you that some of the entries are much shorter than the Chippendale one, because not many people were as illustrious as him. And actually, because this is a short entry, we can see that actually, I'm glad to say, all of the tags are actually correct. So we said he's a cabinet maker here on the left. That's what CM stands for. This is originally a print dictionary, so they use those kind of abbreviations for space. We said that he worked in Ormolu and Mount, which we've got Mounts here and Ormolu. And then commode was an object he's known to have made, which is indeed the two-drawer commode mentioned here. So that works quite nicely. And just to finish with, I want to link this back to Layers of London, my hosts for today's talk, because what we did was we extracted all of the furniture makers who had an address in London, which was about, I think we had about 1,200 of those. And then we gave them to the team at Layers, and they mapped them onto a map. Each dot of the map links back to the entry on BIFMO, the biography on BIFMO of that furniture maker. So this is a really nice way of visualizing where these furniture makers went. However, there are a couple of caveats I do need to tell you about, because I think Chippendale worked in St Martin's Lane, and that was already a hotspot for furniture makers at the time in the 18th century. But if you go to St Martin's Lane on this Layers map, you won't find any furniture makers at all. And the reason for that is that because this was an automated process, adding hundreds and hundreds of furniture makers to the map, anytime there were 2 streets or more in modern London, we decided we couldn't include them because we can't choose at scale which street is the correct street. So there's actually a St Martin's Lane in Bromley, so that's why St Martin's Lane is not included. And 2 other things which are slight caveats with this. We had to exclude people where the precision of where they lived was not enough. So if there was a street that they were known to have lived on, that's great. We can put a dot on a street somewhere. But if it just says they lived in Camden, well, that's just, for us, that's not enough to put a pin anywhere. We had to leave those off. So that's another reason why people may not appear. And finally, road names do change. So if it said they lived on such and such a road, and that's not a road in modern London, we would have to, of course, have left them off. We don't have time to research what that road, if it still exists, is now known as. That does mean there's quite a lot of work that can be done to improve maps like this. And so I would invite you, if you're interested in furniture makers or other things to do with London, to consider adding things to Layers yourselves. And if you want to improve this particular data set, then please do get in touch with the Layers team and they will help you out with that. So I'm going to stop there and hopefully some of you will have questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great, really interesting. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat now and I'll read them out to you, Jonathan. I think someone said something. Chella asks, is the BHO content free until September for institutions in other countries too?
Yep, it's free around the world, everywhere. Anyone with an internet connection can get access until the end of September. I should also say that nearly all of our content is free all the time. So we have about 1,300 transcription volumes. About 1,100 of those are always free to everyone, everywhere in the world. Until the end of September, everyone in the world can get access to everything.
Oh. Julie has a question too. She says, fascinating. Is there an option of locating correspondence between specific people?
No, that's something we would love to do, but it's quite tricky. If you go to Connected Histories and have a look there, I didn't talk about this because I forgot, but there's a search option to look for people and places, and that's done using a kind of it's called named entity recognition. It's a way of trying to work out through algorithms who's a person, who is what's a place and things by the grammar of the sentence. We got about 70% accurate on Connected History, so that does have named person searching, but it's really hard to do well. We want to do it on BHO, we want to get it right, and we want to make it, we want, as I was trying to make the point, we want BHO to be very accurate in its search results, so we would rather get it better, if that makes sense. Does that answer the question? The answer is no, in short, but we'd like to do it, but it's really hard to do.
Stephen asked, which OS editions can be found on BHO?
Yeah, they're known as the first epoch. So I think they were done between about 1850 or 1840 and 1910 or 1920 and so. So it was the first complete mapping of the whole of Great Britain done by the OS. So that first epoch edition. Beyond that, I can't really, I don't, if there's a very technical kind of cartography question there, I don't really know the answer, sorry.
So by the time they released the map, the first bits they worked on would be out of date?
Well, I think that's an interesting thing because they obviously, it took 70 years. Parts of the map are older than other parts, but it's not obvious which sheet was done when. So it's quite hard to look at one sheet and say this was done in 1880, so therefore I know such and such. You have to be quite careful. Such a big window and the metadata on the map, you'd probably have to go to the original print map and find one and find out exactly when that sheet was done.
And Julia asks, are the maps available for general use?
You can look at them. They're all free to look at. The only thing is that we use them by under license from something called the Landmark Information Group, who took the digital photographs of the map. So we're not allowed to let you republish them. If people write in to ask for, say, a thesis or a book, we have to say, look, you're sorry, you'll have to go to the Landmark Information Group and ask them because it's not our copyright to give.
And is Connected Histories free to use as well?
It's free to use, but the way it works is that, so all of these resources gave us their text behind the scenes, like British newspapers, but some of them, I think the minority, are paid for search services. So if you find something on British newspapers through BHO, through Connected Histories, you will see a snippet, but you won't, if you don't have an account, you can't just go all the way through to the newspaper image. We do have a key icon on the list of resources which shows which ones are paid for resources. Most of them aren't. Connected Histories itself is completely free to use, but you might want more to get the full thing. You may have to pay, if that makes sense. Does it make sense?
Are the newspapers in Connected Histories different from those in online British newspaper archive?
It's the same. It's the same text. So they gave us everything, but you can only see a snippet, so you can't read a whole newspaper article. But you should try it because it'll be more obvious by trying it than me telling you. But if you look for, say, Liam, you might see about 10 words either side of the word Liam, but the whole article about Liam you can't read. You'd have to go to British newspapers and you'd have to pay or have a subscription somehow.
And And someone's asked, sorry, I missed the beginning. Up to what period of history did you say the BHO specializes in?
Really, I would say we stopped being super useful around about 1800, but because of some of our texts were written much later, we do have some 20th century material, for example. We have, I didn't mention it and probably should have done, but we have an amazing series called The Survey of London, which is an incredibly detailed architectural history of London. We've got 60 volumes on BHO. It's all free to use. Some of those were written, 10 years ago, so they go up to the architecture of when they wrote the book. The same with Victoria County history, for example. So that if that was published in 1990, it would take the history of the parish up to 1990. But the main chronological sweep is not 20th century.
Okay, any other questions? Go ahead. Are there any other professions apart from furniture makers included?
Not on, we have, on British History Online, we do have a few other records of professions. Not many, but we have, for example, there's a medical practitioners in London in the 16th century dictionary, for example. So there's a few things. I would look around, but we don't have tons of it. And certainly BIFMO, British and Irish history, that's bigger than anything else we have in any other profession, but we do have them bits here and there.
And someone asked, are there any sources for the study of the British book trade that you know?
I don't think we do, unfortunately, have anything really on the British book trade. No, I wish we did, because it's a great topic, but I can't think of it. I mean, you can try a search if you know a particular bookseller or printer and see what you get, but most likely they're going to be kind of oblique references, not very focused.
Okay, I think that might be all the questions until someone gets in there, but lots of people are saying thank you for all the hard work at BHO.
Very well, thank you all for coming. Thanks for using BHO as well. Yeah, and please do try and have a good look around.
Yeah, we encourage everyone, and if you find any interesting information, you can then make it a record on Layers of London. So synergy. All right. Thanks very much, Jonathan, and thank you everyone for coming. We're going to be having more webinars over the next few weeks, months, forever, who knows. So make sure you keep an eye on our mailing list and our social media to keep up to date with all of that. So I hope you all have a nice afternoon and a good weekend. All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye, everybody.